Get comfortable with English in comfort. This is your English listening practice podcast to help you learn and improve naturally.
One of the most common questions you hear in English is, what do you usually do? Or how does your typical day go?
It's such a natural way to start a conversation, get to know someone, or simply share a bit about your life. Knowing how to describe your routine is essential for everyday English conversation.
It really is. Sometimes it feels easy to say I work or I study, but explaining what you actually do hour by hour or how your typical week looks can be a bit more challenging for learners. So you need to be moving beyond simple answers and be able to share details that make your English speaking practice feel much more natural and personal. By the way, I'm Emily.
And I'm Liam.
This is English in Comfort, the place where you can learn English while you relax, lie down, or even while you sleep. No pressure, no stress, just real English.
Today, we're going to help you master the art of talking about your day in English. We'll show you the common phrases and simple structures you can use to describe your everyday activities clearly and confidently.
That's right. First, listen to us talk about our day. Just listen to our conversations and try to follow along. Don't worry if you don't understand every single word right away. Just focus on the main ideas and how we build our sentences.
So, Emily, how does your day usually go?
Well, my mornings are usually quite structured, actually. I'm a bit of a morning person, so I tend to wake up pretty early, around 6:30 a.m. most weekdays.
Wow, that's quite an early start.
The very first thing I always do is make myself a cup of herbal tea. I love starting my day quietly. While the tea is steeping, I usually spend about 10 minutes doing some light stretching, just to get my body ready for the day.
That sounds like a really calm way to begin.
It really helps. After that, I often sit down by the window with my journal. I try to write in it for about 15 minutes, just to organize my thoughts and set a positive intention for the day. It helps me feel centered before the busyness starts. Then, around 7:30 a.m., it's time for Bella's morning walk. Bella is my dog, remember? We usually head to the local park, which is just a short walk from my apartment. It's almost always a lovely time because the park isn't too crowded yet, and it's nice to get some fresh air.
Do you ever run into anyone during your walks?
Sometimes it's not every day, but occasionally I'll bump into other dog walkers or a neighbor. We just exchange a quick good morning or a short chat. It's a nice little connection before I head back home to start my workday.
Sounds pretty ideal.
Yes, that's how my typical morning usually unfolds. After getting back home and making myself a quick light lunch, I usually have a big salad or some leftovers, I then transition into my work block. Around noon, I always sit down at my desk and start tackling my emails and main tasks for the day. I often have at least 1 or 2 video calls in the early afternoon, usually with our team or with clients. These calls can sometimes last for an hour or even an hour and a half, so they take up a good chunk of my time. They're great for collaboration, but they do require a lot of focus.
I know that feeling. It's easy to get absorbed in calls and forget to move.
Absolutely. So, I try to build in a short break around 3 p.m. I'll step away from my desk, maybe stretch a bit more, or grab another cup of tea. If the weather's nice, I might even step out onto my balcony for a few minutes just to get some fresh air. It helps to clear my head.
That's smart. It's important to break up the workday.
It really is. After that short break, I usually spend the rest of my afternoon on specific projects, doing research or anything else. I try to finish up my main work tasks by about 5:30 p.m.
So your afternoons are pretty dedicated to work.
Having that dedicated time for focused work in the afternoon really helps me get through my tasks efficiently. That's how my typical afternoon usually goes.
So, your afternoons are really productive, Emily. After finishing up work, how does your typical evening usually unwind?
Well, after closing my laptop and stretching, which always feels great after a focused afternoon, my evening routine usually begins with getting some fresh air. I often go for a short walk around my neighborhood just to disconnect from work and clear my head. After that, I typically spend some time preparing dinner. I love to cook, so this is a relaxing part of my day. I usually try to make something healthy but delicious, like a simple pasta or a stir fry with lots of vegetables. It's mostly relaxed during the week. After dinner and cleaning up, which is the part I definitely don't enjoy as much, I almost always curl up on the sofa with a book. I'm a big reader, so reading is a huge part of my evening routine. Sometimes it's a novel, sometimes it's a nonfiction book.
You don't watch TV?
I rarely watch much TV during the week, mostly just reading. Then around 9:30 p.m., Bella and I go for her last short walk of the day. It's usually very quiet and peaceful outside at that time. After that, I just get ready for bed, maybe read for another few minutes if I'm really into my book, and then I usually call it a night by around 10:30 p.m. So that's how my typical day usually flows from early morning to late evening.
Wow, that's a really consistent and balanced routine you've got there.
Now, I'm curious about your side of things. How does your day usually start? What's your typical morning like?
My mornings are a bit different from yours, perhaps a little less structured, especially the very start. I usually wake up a bit later than you, around 7:30 a.m. on weekdays. I'm definitely not a morning person like you.
I totally get that. So, what's the first thing on your agenda? Do you jump straight out of bed?
Not always. My first step is always to make myself a strong cup of coffee. I can't really function before that first mug. While it's brewing, I'll often check my phone for any urgent messages or news headlines, but I try not to get too lost in it.
So, coffee first, then a quick check in with the world.
That's right. After that, I usually have a quick, light breakfast. Sometimes it's just some toast, sometimes yogurt with fruit. Nothing too fancy, but enough to give me energy. I almost always try to fit in some exercise. After breakfast, I typically go for a run, or if the weather's bad, I'll do a quick workout at home. That's a non-negotiable part of my morning, even if I'm feeling a bit tired. It helps me wake up properly and get ready for the day. After my workout, I take a quick shower, and then I'm usually ready to start my workday. So that's how my typical morning usually goes. Coffee, a quick bite, exercise, and then getting ready for work.
What do you usually get up to after those morning routines?
Well, after getting ready, I usually sit down at my desk around 9:30 a.m. and dive into my work for the day. My afternoons are often focused on specific tasks like editing audio or working on new ideas for our projects. I typically have 1 or 2 virtual meetings in the afternoon to discuss upcoming projects. These can sometimes take up a good hour or so. After those meetings, I usually try to take a short break, maybe around 2 p.m. I'll step away from my screen, stretch my legs, and grab another drink, usually just water or some sparkling water to stay hydrated.
That's a good habit to keep your energy up.
It really helps. Sometimes, if I'm feeling a bit tired, I might even listen to a short podcast episode, not for work, just for myself, to reset my brain. After that short break, I usually spend the rest of my afternoon on more independent tasks, like researching topics or writing outlines. That's often how it goes. I try to finish up my main work around 5 p.m., giving myself a little buffer before the evening officially begins.
How does your typical evening usually unwind after you finish up?
Well, once I finish work around 5 p.m., the first thing I usually do is step away from my desk completely. I might go for another short walk, just around my neighborhood to get some fresh air and clear my head before dinner.
That's a good way to transition out of work mode.
It is. Then, I often prepare dinner. I enjoy cooking, but I'm usually pretty quick about it during the week. Something simple, like a stir-fry or a quick pasta dish. After dinner and cleaning up, which I always try to do immediately, my evenings are usually quite relaxed. I often spend some time reading a book, or sometimes I'll watch a documentary or a movie. It just depends on what I'm in the mood for. On a typical weekday evening, it's about relaxing. I might occasionally meet up with friends for a quick coffee if they're free, but that's not every night. Most evenings, it's just quiet time. I usually aim to be in bed by around 10:30 p.m. or 11 p.m. I read for a bit and then I usually call it a night. So, that's how my typical evening unfolds. It's usually quite calm, especially after those busy work days.
All right, everyone, you've just heard Liam and me talk about our typical days. Now, let's break down some of the most useful things and phrases you can use when you want to talk about your day and routine. So, the most common and direct way to ask about someone's daily routine is simply, how does your day usually go?
Or you can ask, what's your typical day like? This asks for a general description of their day.
If you want to be more specific about activities, you can ask, what do you usually do in the mornings or afternoons or evenings? For example, what do you usually do in the evenings after work?
You might also hear questions about specific days. What do you do on weekdays or weekends? For example, what do you do on weekends for fun?
These questions are great starters for a real English conversation about routines.
Now, when you're talking about your routine, what you usually do, what happens regularly, you always use the present simple.
This is really important. The present simple is for facts, habits, and routines. It's how we describe things that happen consistently.
That's right. For example, when Emily was talking about her morning, she said, I tend to wake up pretty early. I always make myself a cup of herbal tea. I usually spend about 10 minutes doing some light stretching.
So remember, when you're talking about your daily habits or routines, whether you're asking or answering, the present simple tense is your key.
When we talk about our day, we use words that tell us how often you do something. They are called adverbs of frequency. These words are super useful for describing your typical day without getting too complicated, like the word usually or often.
Let's look at some common ones. Always. This means you do it 100% of the time, every single time. For example, I always make myself a cup of herbal tea first thing in the morning. Usually, this means you do it most of the time very often. For example, I usually wake up around 6:30 a.m. on weekdays. Often, this means you do it many times, quite a lot. For example, I often have at least 1 or 2 video calls in the afternoon. We also have sometimes. This means you do it at certain times, but not always. It's about half the time, maybe. Example: I sometimes bump into other dog walkers at the park. Occasionally. This means you do it every now and then, not very often. Example: I might occasionally meet up with friends for a quick coffee. Rarely. This means you almost never do it. It's very uncommon for you. Example: I rarely watch much TV during the week. And finally, we have never. This means you do it 0% of the time. You absolutely do not do it. Example: I never skip my morning run.
See how these words add so much more detail? Instead of just saying, I go for a run, you can say, I always go for a run, which paints a clearer picture of your routine. So, try using these words when you talk about your routine. They'll make your English speaking practice sound much more smooth and natural.
Now, let's see useful phrases and expressions you can use to describe your typical day. These are fantastic for making your English conversation sound even more natural.
Instead of just saying, I do this or I do that, these phrases add a lot of nuance and flow to your descriptions.
Let's start with ways to talk about what you generally do, what you have a habit of doing. Tend to. This means you usually do something or it's your habit, but not always. For example, I tend to wake up pretty early on weekdays, meaning I usually wake up early. Then we have the phrase, can't really function, before or without. This is a casual way to say you need something before you can start working or doing things effectively. For example, I can't really function before that first mug of coffee, meaning I need coffee to start my day well. A bit of a or something of a. Use this to describe yourself or a habit in a casual way. For example, I'm a bit of a morning person, meaning I enjoy mornings. Or, he's something of a night owl, which means he likes to stay up late.
These phrases are great for talking about your personal routines and preferences.
When you're describing your day, you'll want to talk about when things happen. Here are some useful time-related phrases. First thing in the morning. This means the very first activity you do after waking up. Example: first thing in the morning, I make myself a cup of tea. Around used to give an approximate time. Example: I usually wake up around 6:30 a.m. Later in the day or in the early or late afternoon used to refer to a general period of time. Example: I have a few meetings later in the day. Example: I often have calls in the early afternoon.
And these are some more phrases to talk about the things you do regularly. Dive into something. It means to start doing something with a lot of focus or enthusiasm. For example, I dive into my work emails. Tackle something. It means to deal with a task or problem. For example, I tackle my main tasks for the day. Head out or head back. To go somewhere or return from somewhere. For example, I head out to the park. I head back home after my walk. Grab a quick meal or drink means to quickly get or eat something. For example, I grab a cup of coffee. I make myself a quick light lunch. Wind down or unwind, to relax after a period of activity or stress. For example, my evenings are about how I wind down. Reading helps me unwind after a busy day. Call it a night. A casual phrase meaning to stop doing what you're doing and go to bed. For example, I usually call it a night by around 10:30 p.m.
And that brings us to the end of our episode all about how to talk about your day in English.
Now it's your turn. We would absolutely love to hear from you. In the comments below, tell us about your typical day. Try to use some of the phrases and words we talked about. What do you usually do in the mornings? How does your afternoon tend to go? What do you always do in the evenings? Sharing your own day is fantastic English speaking practice and a great way to use your new vocabulary. It's also wonderful for our community to see how different people's lives usually unfold.
If you found this episode helpful for your English listening and speaking practice, and for improving your everyday English fluency, remember to subscribe to English in Comfort wherever you listen to podcasts.
By subscribing, you'll ensure you don't miss any of our episodes, packed with more English conversation tips and useful lessons for your English learning journey.
Thank you so much for letting us be a part of your learning. Keep practicing, keep improving, and take care, everyone.